Wabarakatuh katoa. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the FSC ReGenerations conference. This is the Life Insurance Breakfast panel discussion where we will discuss the question, has COVID-19 fundamentally changed the life insurance? I'm Peter Doherty, the Chief Customer Officer of Fidelity Life. And just before we start, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the sponsors of the session, Strategy, and the rest of the conference sponsors. Without your generous support, this great event wouldn't be possible. Sitting in on the panel today, we have a wonderful group of people with plenty to say. So just before we jump straight into the session, I'll let you know who they are. We've got Jon Herries from the Ministry of Health. We've got Kirsten Young from Asteron. We've got Stephen Potter from AIA. And we've got Katrina Church from the insurance people. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A functionality to pass them through, and that way they'll pop up on my screen and I can put them to the panel. It's a huge understatement to say that COVID-19 has had a seismic impact on many businesses and industries the world over. Whilst New Zealand has escaped much of the direct impact for 2020, there was still plenty of second-order challenges like shipping delays leading to a shortage of goods and supplies. And the second half of 2021 has brought plenty more. I was ashamed to see organisations like the YHA announced a few weeks ago that they were unable to continue operating after more than 90 years. I've got great memories of many stays in their hostels as a younger fellow. Whether COVID has had a fundamental impact on life insurance is a broad question, and there's a number of lenses that we could examine that through. But I'd like to unpack it a little bit and zoom in on one word, which is fundamental. And I'll ask Stephen the first question. Stephen, in your view, how does COVID compare to previous world events, either health or otherwise, from a life insurance perspective? And what kind of lasting impact do you think it might have in comparison, or do we even know yet?
Thank you, Pete, and good morning, everyone. Great to be here. It's a really good question to start the session with.
It's a big one.
Look, it's a big one. Look, the last global pandemic we had was the Spanish flu in 1919. And I think it's difficult to make any direct comparisons for a number of reasons. The Spanish flu's immune response was such that it targeted younger, healthier lives. That's completely different from what we're seeing with COVID-19. And it was allowed to spread. And the main reason it was allowed to spread was that there was a direct effort to suppress bad news to keep morale up during the war. I think today with COVID, we have a much larger, much more condensed population. We're much more mobile globally. But I think we've got newer technologies as well. You only have to look at, for example, the ability to generate and develop rapid testing and treatments and vaccines that we've done and deploy them really, really quickly, which, probably wasn't even conceivable 10 years ago to some degree. I think coming a little further forward from 1919, if we look at the GFC, the global financial crisis of 2007, there are aspects of that I think we're seeing. There was, a lot of significant financial implications. There was a lot of business failure. There was a lot of pressure on business and on the economy, and that translated into significant mental health difficulties across the board, and certainly in some parts of the world as a consequence of the GFC, you did see spikes in suicide rates and the like. So I think, that there are some things there that we can learn about managing that financial pressure. And if you look at the amount of money that even the New Zealand government has sort of put in way of support of COVID, I think, is noticeably different from what happened through then. There's been isolated pockets such as MERS and SARS over the years, but nothing on the scale that we're dealing with now. So from our perspective, it remains to be seen how some of this plays out. But I think some of the things that we can take away and some of the things that we can observe, particularly for a future business perspective, is an increased use of digital tools to transact business. COVID's accelerated some of that development, but some of this is greenfield stuff. Individuals have become more adaptable to change. And we've had to change to try and arrest the spread of COVID. And I think we've started to mitigate some of the risks simply by changing our own collective behaviours. So I think if I was to summarise what's the lasting impact from this at this point, it's our ability as people and as communities to be able to accelerate change. As I said, big question to try and answer in a space, but there's a couple of observations from us anyway.
And Jon, talking about change, the Ministry of Health and the work that you guys are doing and the things you've got underway at the moment, I don't imagine anybody in the ministry could have conceived this in the middle of 2019. So what have you seen in terms of the biggest fundamental changes for your function in your organization?
Yeah, so as you know, Pete, I work in technology, but my background's not in technology, so my background's in healthcare delivery and commissioning. And I think what we've seen in COVID, particularly in New Zealand, is kind of when you give the health system a singular focus, it can do a lot of stuff really quickly. And so you can see that, we've kind of not only started to understand this disease, but we've also responded in a pretty aggressive fashion as a health system, and far enough so that members of the public are asking, have we gone too far from a public health perspective? Arguably, we would never say it's far enough from a public health perspective because we're looking to protect as much life as possible. But there's been a lot of work done at our end, and it's kind of, we're getting up to the end of year 2, and it's been pretty tiring. But I think if I just reflect on our latest work we've done, which was the My Vaccine Pass. I don't think the government's ever released a digital service that has been so widely available to so many people in this country so quickly. So we're over 3.6 million passes issued, about 500,000 international travel certificates, and that's all off the back of digital identity, which I think I came and talked last year at the conference and said was on our roadmap. So here's a really interesting observation. With the investment in Header, which is the National Health Information Platform, which I talked about last time, we'd expected to get 1 million users over 6 years. We've got over 3 million users in less than a month. So you can start to see some of the fundamentals for us are changing, and kind of probably in terms of how we will deliver healthcare in the future means a big difference in terms of both health insurance and life insurance, and kind of the public's perception of that. So
I'm a little bit of a geek. I'm actually a pretty big geek. But when I just start to delve into some of the numbers that you guys are talking about, it's actually quite mind-blowing in terms of the speed of uptake and the speed of adoption. So it's an incredible achievement from one person's perspective.
Yeah, and it's I'd say it's the interesting thing is, of course, none of this is perfect, and yes, a bunch of it's rushed. But you look at the possibilities that digital offers the health system, and possibly offers kind of health and life insurers as well, in the sense that how are you engaging with your customers? How are you maintaining that relationship and building that over time? Because of course, COVID's one of those things which saw a lot of people reevaluate kind of their life choices in this, and kind of their time horizon. So life insurance isn't a choice you make about tomorrow's problems. It's the day after tomorrow's problems that you're talking about from a life insurance perspective. And so if people are busy focusing on today and tomorrow rather than on their longer term future, how does a life insurer think in the context of building that relationship and building kind of an ongoing engagement model with their customers? Because I'm guilty of this as most people are. You buy your life insurance and you set and forget, and come back in 40 years time. So it's not it's not something that people have been engaged with on a regular basis. Think about maybe there's an opportunity. There's been a few entries into kind of the credit scoring market to make that much more immediate. So there's a UK firm called ClearScore, and then there's Credit Simple here in New Zealand. Credit Simple's run afoul of some rules, but engaging people on their credit score in order to manage that over the long term is something that's kind of a really applicable model that might be kind of considered in a life insurance context. It's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, I mean, talking about customers, I spend lots of my time thinking about customers. Kat, you talk to customers on a day in, day out basis. Do you think that COVID and in particular Delta, if it's any different, has had any significant change on their attitudes and interests in getting protected?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Probably what I would say, the biggest difference that has been this lockdown versus last lockdown is that people are more accepting of a lockdown, but they're also a lot more fearful. So there is a lot of fear now as we've gone from elimination strategy to learning to live with it, to how you engage with that. And as a result of that, people are feeling vulnerable, whether it's their work vulnerability, whether it's just vulnerability that's come across with a lower level of resilience because they've been working from home, they're exhausted. I mean, Auckland, I just think there's this we could all just have a nice little pillow and sleep for 3 months and we'd probably just be able to catch up, right? We're all pretty tired. And I think that's pretty much what our clients are like too. I've never seen as much engagement with existing clients who, we've changed the way that we adapt, interact with them. It's all Teams, it's all Zooms, it's all phones. They are just so grateful of actually understanding how their policies work. Retention of product is increased. I would have thought there would have been a lot more arrears and lapse management in this period of time, but actually people have been holding on to their covers because they actually really understand the purpose of them a lot more. But 3 products, life insurance, people are, there's more people with debt in this country without life insurance. They are engaging, they are wanting to get covered. They feel nervous, they feel worried for their families. People are worried about the health society, health sector and how they're actually going to be able to take care of them going forward. And so medical is now becoming a must-have, not would like. And people are worried about the words long COVID and what that actually means, because we don't really know what that means in this country in particular. We haven't had the experience of the UK, the US, and the other countries. And so we have clients that we see are burnt out, that are exhausted. Put long COVID into that, and that will be really interesting. So, never seen more people actually want to have a conversation, which is really exciting from that point of view.
And what about your perspective, Kirsten? What are you saying? Are you saying anything different, or is it very similar?
Well, I think if we come back to the original question, and Morena, everybody, thanks for having me. Has COVID fundamentally changed the industry sector? And I'm going to say no. If you consider that as insurers, we're actually every day geared up to look at things that people prefer not to look at. And that's injury, that's illness, and that's death. And our industry is fundamentally set up to consider impacts of illness as we continually also adapt our approach based on medical advancements and also, I guess, other evidence that comes through. So because insurers have a really long-term view, we're able to move past that immediate crisis state and make sure that we can adapt our long-term modelling. And because of that, it actually means that we're well positioned to support customers as we have continued to do so. Surprisingly, Pete, we've actually been experiencing COVID now for almost 2 years, and our customers have continued to remain supported. And because of that, it evidences the fact that we're in a good position. Every one of us are set up to work digitally from home. We make sure that everything runs smoothly. No one's dropping a ball. Claims continue to be paid. Policies continue to be sold. So fundamentally, COVID hasn't changed the insurance sector. However, there are factors that we need to consider. And I think one of the bigger factors that reared its head quite quickly was absolutely the short-term financial vulnerability of customers, especially businesses. Anybody that was impacted with COVID restrictions and lockdowns meant that there was a reduction in their income. And premium waivers and premium holidays, they've been a really big focus for Asteron and our response to the pandemic. And we've taken that long-term view because that's what we believe our customers and our advisors need from us right now. Another factor I think that we need is the consumer confidence. It's a scary world out there, and we need to work together to actually lift the confidence and trust that customers have in what we do, especially when you consider that Kiwis tend to be underinsured in the life and the income protection type policies. And we believe that Kiwis need to know what options are available to them, regardless of their vaccination status. Our Asteron Life Chief Underwriter, Adrian Lowe, just this past Friday produced a really helpful COVID FAQ sheet for advisors. And just a couple of things that Adrian touched upon. Any customers who took out their insurance prior to the pandemic will have their COVID-19 and its impacts regardless of vaccination status. She also talks in the flyer about the fact that at this stage we don't require evidence of vaccination as part of our underwriting process, and that our policies do not exclude any vaccinations or complications from them. If customers do suffer any side effects, we'd consider that side effect or illness to be a cause of the claim rather than the vaccination. And like all of us and our reinsurers, we'll be closely monitoring the medical developments around COVID-19, but we feel that at this stage it's way too early to comment on the long-term impacts of COVID, especially when it comes to what is available in the market and future premium costs. But we treat COVID just like we would any other illness, and that, if we were to make any changes, know that it would definitely need to be evidence-based. Yeah. So that was one factor, and another factor, as Kat's mentioned, was also the behaviour of advisors and customers. And from an Asteron perspective, we've definitely seen lots of advisor businesses adapt to become virtual means, and Asteron happens to be one of those businesses. While we all love a good face-to-face, we continue and will continue to offer virtual options to support advisors, just simply because it's cost effective. It reduces any downtime that travel might impact. And we've also found that we're able to get more advisors attending virtual sessions over a traditional face-to-face. So, for example, our last session, we had 120 advisors attend. Over the 6 months last year, we ran a total of 67 webinars reaching advisors and had over 4,000 attendees. So people are accustomed to working in that line. And as we've seen an uplift in adapting to technology, the other thing we've noticed is that rubber band effect. So when restrictions have come into play, people have adapted. Majority of advisors have adapted really nicely. The minute those restrictions reduce, that rubber band just comes straight back. They switch back to what they are most comfortable with. However, there are some advisors that have made a switch for good. So one example that I heard of the other day was an advisor that actually did shifted full time to a virtual platform. He did that because he discovered that he was able to talk to more customers, reach them more, and had a higher uplift at the end as a result of it. And he developed and created an actual studio in his office. It's got its logo in the background, and it was, pot plants from what I understand. And there was a couple of advantages to that. We've all got our halo glow of Teams or Zoom, and so that's not there. And I guess the other thing is the impact from the customer's experience as well as the advisor's experience, where they have created a replica of a face-to-face environment to try and get that professionalism lifting. So we are still seeing within the segment there are advisors that have struggled to adapt for whatever reason that might be, and that could be where they are in terms of stage of their business. Has their business reached a maturity level, or is it on a decline and they're wanting to exit the industry? Just like Kat mentioned, we are hearing that appointments are high, and we are also hearing that customers are tending to take a little longer to make their decisions. But fundamentally, advisors, insurers absolutely must work together collaboratively to actually ensure those customers that understand what they've got and what their options are.
Cool. And Kat, thinking about the broader advisor community, I mean, looking at them as a board and a group, that the fundamental way that they do business has been disrupted to a degree. How do you think they're holding up? I mean, what's going through their minds at the moment?
It depends on whether they actually got onto the digital transformation themselves. If they haven't, they're struggling, let's be honest, because they also get their energy from seeing clients. And so if they're not seeing clients, that's the beast of an advisor. They love people. They love to see people. So if they're not seeing them, they are struggling themselves. I think if they have jumped on the digital transformation, though, they will find that their businesses will be stronger and healthier as a result. You're absolutely right, Kirsten. You can actually see so many more people. You can engage in such a positive way. It is actually a really personal one-on-one meeting. It doesn't have to be, I mean, we're not today, obviously, but when you're talking to a client, you can still see their eyes. You can still see their the way they feel about what you're talking about. So you can still sort of drag the information from them as to make sure that they are being open. It's really, really, it's a lot quicker to engage. But you make the comment they're taking a while to make decisions. I'm not traveling the country. I'm sitting in an office, and so so are those clients. They're actually able to come in at any time and wherever they are. But one thing I think you do need to watch is exhaustion. It's a real thing. I never knew that there was a thing called compassion fatigue, and I never knew that there was a thing called Zoom or Teams fatigue, and there really is. You've got to make sure that you put some structures in your day to take care of you. When people are needing us, we've got to make sure we take care of ourselves. And so we talk about that a lot about, the whole person concept and MDRT, which is an organisation I belong to, and we spend a lot of time actually doing that. And so if other advisors out there listening today are feeling that way, think about how they can actually fill their souls up again and top themselves up, because that's really, really important. I think over the next few months, we are going to see a lot more claims. So whenever you have a lockdown scenario, having access to treatment is obviously declined. And now we're going to start seeing people actually engaging the health professionals and going back to see their doctors or actually getting things tested. And we've already seen that with claims that are coming in this last couple of weeks. And so we'll probably see that over the next 2 to 3 months, which will put pressure on all the insurers accordingly. So we've just got to take care of making sure our staff are well supported in that space. I think that our role is more important than it ever has been in this whole community of advice, and it's actually making sure we've got enough of us around. So we've gone through regulation change. So we've seen some exit. I'd hate to see people exit because they're so exhausted because of this environment. So we've got to make sure that we're bringing new people in as well, and making sure that our businesses are well supported. There is a challenge finding good staff. I mean, we've got 4 openings at the moment, and that is difficult to fill. So that's important to keep an eye on too. But as long as you've engaged in digital transformation in your business, you'll be absolutely fine. You will actually love this environment. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think one of the things you just mentioned there around now coming out of lockdown, starting to see more people kind of look for screens on things that have cropped up in that time. It's certainly something that we've seen in the media coming from overseas, is that the impact of lockdowns on the actual health service, reduced screening and reduced treatment. Jon, is that something that you've got a view on from the ministry in a New Zealand context? Is it something we need to worry about?
So we saw this last year in the lockdown that we had, where people were very worried about COVID-19, and so and obviously were locked in their houses. So not by us, by themselves, but we didn't go around and put door locks on everybody's houses. But what we saw coming out of that lockdown was a big catch up by the health system. So I expect that's going to happen again. We've also seen a number of our services continue to be kind of low, utilized at a lower level. So there are obviously things that people might see less as hugely important things, and particularly in the context of if they've got financial worries, but that they may be putting off some things that they should have been dealing with earlier in order to either make ends meet or to focus on kind of other priorities in their lives. So I'm sure we're going to hit a bit of a wave of waiting lists and referrals. The part of the problem with that is obviously people are going to come in a higher acuity, so they're going to be sicker when they come in, so therefore they're going to need more treatment or more sophisticated treatments because they're coming later. And unfortunately, as Katrina said, it's a pretty tight job market out there. So it's exactly the same for the health system, both in our technology space as well as kind of in the service delivery space. So we're in this situation where the pandemic's really pushing the health system to the limit, and it's not like we've got a bunch of people sitting around doing nothing, waiting for all of the referrals to come back in. So it's interesting times. And
carry on, Jon.
No, I was just going to say, and we're seeing this in the NHS, biggest waiting lists ever in the NHS. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be expecting that here. And of course, we've just moved to the traffic light framework, which is going to put more onus on the health system managing COVID in the community. And so some really interesting opportunities in there that I'll talk about as we carry on. But yeah.
And so, Stephen, do you think that will have an impact on underwriting and claims down the line?
Yeah, I think almost inevitably it's likely to have in some way, shape or form. I think Jon just touched on that with access to services. We're already seeing a slowdown in rehabilitation opportunities, for example, with our IP claims. And that means delays on customers returning to work. So stretching that tail out in those claims, obviously, it has a negative impact, I think, for those individual claimants who are trying to get back to work. Actually, we all want to be sort of socially connected and connected through work and through purpose. So that has its own detrimental effect. And I think Kat touched on that. In some ways, it's an exciting time to be working with all of the change that you have to manage, but you're connected and you're part of something that I think is actually really, really important. And we all look for purpose in what we do. So anytime that's taken away and stretched out, I think it's going to be negative. I think COVID's generated a lot of commentary, both in mainstream and social media. And I think a lot of claimants are kind of starting to develop their own preconceptions about some of the stuff. And that adds a layer of complexity to IP claims management. If you've got someone with an entrenched belief system that you can't shift to kind of help them rehab, then that's going to be challenging. And I think with COVID in particular, we've seen a level of sort of entrenched belief of all sorts of things that I can't ever recall seeing with anything else at any previous point. So, it's a significant hurdle that the rehab team needs to come to grips with to assist people. And that's not just managing kind of that one individual who's off sick. That's actually managing the perceptions of the family that sit around that person as well. So it's multifaceted, and there's a level of complexity there that I don't have seen before. I think Jon touched on it once again, a significant decrease in, say, bowel and breast cancer screening, for example, which is likely to play out in trauma claims down the track. I think one of the things that probably I haven't heard at all is about clarity of information and what's actually required for claim time. So there's some information coming out of the UK now that suggests for those people hospitalised, with COVID at the more serious end of the spectrum, they're seeing very high levels of troponin rise. Now, troponin we tend to associate with heart attack and with trauma payouts for heart attacks. So what level of information is now required to be absolutely certain from a claims perspective we're paying a claim that's actually under the definition of the policy and not something else masquerading? So things like that we need to be clear of, that we need to have really good information around diagnosis. And we've got sound underwriting practices. We expect to clearly identify those people who have had COVID or have got COVID, and we've got plans and processes in place to manage that. We haven't at AIA had to do anything really in the way of altering too many questions around that sort of thing in our application forms. We feel that we're well set up and have always had robust processes, so we identify that and we're able to take account of that. We've introduced limitations historically. Certainly last year through the lockdown, there were a lot of financial limitations. We've gradually unwound those as we've found that either they were inexact in kind of managing the issues we were trying to solve for, and as we got a lot more clarity around what was happening. And I think even this time round in 2021, and we're only a year down the track, we've learnt so much out of what we did the first time, and we've used that to guide us in terms of what we do second time round. And with all the noise around COVID and with all the action and activity in so many sectors of the economy, I think sometimes, we were talking about this the other day, I think sometimes the hardest thing to do is to actually press pause and just say, I'm just going to wait and see. I'm not going to make any rash decisions. I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. I'm going to wait and see what plays out. We've got the advent of technology. Our vaccines are getting more effective and hospital treatments are better. We've got new drugs coming online, molnupiravir, for example. These sorts of things are going to help in achieving that level of stability that we're looking for. So I think, from my own perspective, I think the future actually looks pretty good. It looks different, but different doesn't have to be bad. We are resilient as people. We have some of the best scientific minds working on how to fix these things, and I'm confident that it will be managed. And as I said, sometimes the hardest thing to do is just to press pause. So let's not jump to any conclusions. Let's sit back and play what's in front of us.
I will press pause there for 1 second, and I will just remind everybody to pop your questions into the Q&A if you have any. We've had one through from Samita Paul that I'll touch on slightly later. But yeah, drop them in and we'll see what we can do. And so, Jon, a quick question for you just on long COVID. So those are two words that I've heard a lot, but I haven't yet seen any clarity around what it might actually be. Do you have a view on kind of any long lasting impact of COVID or long COVID?
Yeah,
and how it might affect New Zealand?
Good question, Pete. And just to kind of pick up on what Stephen's describing about that pause kind of question. So we've just had the fastest vaccine development in history, albeit off a platform that's been studied for a good 20 years. I think the interesting thing is, so the ministry's committed a significant investment with Victoria University to study long COVID. So those people that have had COVID, how do we follow up with them? And the other interesting thing is, particularly from a technology perspective, we've as a part of the vaccine program, some of you might have been lucky enough to get a text message after you got your vaccine asking whether you had any side effects. It's something we talk about called patient-reported outcome measures or patient-reported experience measures. So probably all familiar with the term real-world evidence, and that's kind of gathering information from people about their actual experience. So, we do double-blind, multi-center, randomized controlled trials in order to understand the effects of medicines, but often those are in 30-year-old males, white males in, European countries. And so when it comes to deploying new medicines or new treatments or understanding new illnesses, particularly in a diverse kind of culture such as New Zealand or country as New Zealand, you end up in the situation where all of that information is really, really important because it helps us understand the direct impacts on our own country. So we deployed some different types of technology into that space. So you might have experienced the text messaging. We're also working on kind of the digital first kind of model. So if you are a close contact or you are if you're self-isolating in the community, we're looking at how we start to engage you through, say, My COVID Record, in order to gather a history of your symptoms or a history of kind of your experience with COVID, and then allow that story to be able to be generated, which generates information for the researchers and information for actuaries and life insurers to be able to say, this is what the numbers say in terms of kind of people's experience, which, it's easy to say that we should rely on the NHS, and we did for cardiovascular risk for a long time until the latest version of Predict came out, which was designed for New Zealand. And of course, that has produces a fundamental change in how we measure risk in this country. So because our people are different. So in that, I think there's some really interesting lessons, not only for us about how we use that data, but also potentially that connection between what services life insurers and health insurers offer, and connecting and reconnecting with your customers to ask those questions on an ongoing basis. Does your cover meet your needs? Are you happy with your cover? Is there anything you need to tell us about? Are you making good behaviour choices? Because it's funny, people talk about healthcare being getting treatment when you need it, and healthcare is really not actually about that. It's about making good decisions every day. Mm-hmm. How much did I eat today? What did I eat? Did I do enough exercise? Am I smoking? Am I drinking too much? And am I on Zoom too much, and do I need to cut down on my Zoom time? So all of these things are things we can measure, and having a digital identity that we've just launched means it should be easier than ever.
Yeah. Kirsten, we've heard from Jon in terms of some of the changes that the ministry have kind of driven and been a part of, and the speed and the magnitude of some of those changes are pretty impressive. Have you seen anything from the life insurance context or within the life insurance market that has surprised you in terms of how quickly or how big the change that's happened over the last year, 2 years?
It's probably just, Pete, I'd say that adaptability to be able to move and get into an electronic means and be there before an advisor needs us so that they can actually help support their customers. I'm pleasantly surprised at that holistic view of what support an insurer would look to produce and create. I think that's vital in terms of offering that confidence and clarity at claim time. It's not just the products themselves, but it's also what kind of sits in and around that. And really love that Asteron have adapted with the Best Doctors offering across 3 generations, not just the policy owner, but their children and the parents and parent-in-laws. The other thing I think that I've been pleasantly surprised in was how we've come together again to help that financial support of customers experiencing vulnerability. And it's not a pigeonhole. I think the industry as a whole has done an incredible shift in our approach and consideration to customers experiencing vulnerability. And I challenge the word vulnerable clients because it's not a person as such or a type of trait that would experience vulnerability. We could come in and out of a vulnerable state at any point. And I think I really love the fact that as an industry, we're thinking of that now. We consider that in our product development. We consider that in our claims experience. We've got at Asteron Life a customer vulnerability team that sits at the on the precipice of our view and comes in and reminds us each step along the way so that we have lots of checks and measures to make sure we're going in the right direction. I like that.
Yeah. And Kath, sometimes it's difficult to look for positives at times of adversity, but quite often there's a hidden silver lining. Do you think there's anything beneficial or anything positive to come out of our experience over the last 2 years?
I think there have been huge positives to come out of it. As a community of our community, the advice community, insurance community, but also as a country. So we've never had it easier to write new business these days, to service our clients with digital transformation. We've never had clients be so quickly adapted to that as well. So, years ago, you would never do a Zoom. Now it's just second nature, and they do it in their cars. I had a fantastic meeting with a CEO of a roofing company the other day while he was in the car having a smoko. It was awesome, and, new business come from it. But I think the other part that I'm really proud of, and I want to acknowledge Jon and the health sector in New Zealand, how incredible are they to come together like they have? The character of New Zealanders has come out. My mother-in-law lives in the US, in the UK. She's seen the way that the character of the people in the UK have been throughout COVID. Character of New Zealanders is pretty important to recognise. We are unique. We look after each other. There is a huge community feel. And you can really see that. And so I think that's something that's come to shine over the last year or two. The other thing to really acknowledge is that the way we work has changed, not just ourselves, but all our clients. They have the greatest ability of taking their children to school when they can go to school, taking their children to school, being able to take a couple of hours off and go to their sports games or do whatever it is, instead of actually sitting in an hour of traffic each way. And I think that's going to have some real positive benefits in the future. We've just got to be really careful of isolation. That's the one thing we've got to be careful of. But I think all of those other things are really positive that we've seen in the last couple of years.
Will they
Pete, can I just make an observation? I'll come back to something, and I'm really interested in Stephen's opinion on this. But I mentioned the vaccine platform that Pfizer's based on, which is mRNA. Research has been going on in that for 20 years now, and basically the first public deployment of it is with the COVID-19 vaccine. And it's knocks the socks off just about every other vaccination type that we've ever had as a human race. And most interestingly, we're now seeing, big races into, phase 2, phase 3 trials for HIV vaccines, malaria vaccines, and I think West Nile virus and a couple of others, where the mRNA platform gets adapted to those, and they're looking to roll that out. That, to me, talk about whether COVID's had a fundamental impact on life insurance. Potentially, yes, because we've discovered this new tool, which is an mRNA-based vaccine, which may, prevent significant amounts of harm globally as a consequence. And so I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on that, Steve. Is that something that's kind of coming through yet, or is this a little bit ahead of the curve?
I think it's a little bit ahead of the curve. It's interesting. I was reading an article published by one of the international reinsurers the other day on, and it was literally that subject. It was, we have, turned the world on its head to deploy a vaccine for COVID, but we're 30 years down the track and we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. Why is that? From a New Zealand perspective, the HIV infection rate is very, very low. It's a matter of 100 or 200 on an annual basis. The treatments are getting quite good. So from purely from a life insurance perspective and a ratings perspective, our rates are much closer to standard than they've ever been. When I started underwriting, HIV was virtually an automatic decline back in the late 80s and early 90s. So the advances made with retroviral treatments and the like are great. We just don't see enough of it down here. Malaria is not something that that we have here, obviously. And it's really interesting. We're doing a piece of work with our group office in Hong Kong, and they're sort of grappling with how do they deal with dengue fever? Well, when was the last time anyone got diagnosed with dengue fever in New Zealand? So we watch this stuff and we plan and think about the impact that it might have for us. But in all honesty, from our perspective, and AIA has done a lot of work around this with the 5590. You look at the, at mental health, at obesity, at smoking, the cardiovascular disease. Those are the risks that concern us the most. And the rest of the stuff, without wishing to undermine how important it is, particularly for those people who suffer from HIV or develop COVID or get malaria, we need to focus on fixing those things, which are all modifiable behaviours. We've tried to do that and continue to work on that through our AIA Vitality program, right? It's about modifying those factors, which for most of us is the stuff that's likely to get us as a consequence of that sort of Western lifestyle that we've all come to enjoy so much.
Give out more vaccines so that people can suffer from.
Yeah, well, if there's a vaccine out there that could help me drop some weight, I'd be really happy to take it.
But imagine, with John, you mentioned before the singular focus getting to where we are now. Imagine if we had the same singular focus around cancer and how we could come up with treatments or get rid of cancer. Imagine what that would do for people. And I think that the speed of which this vaccine has come out, and I think I heard this morning, it's a year since the first one was actually given in the UK, from what I heard this morning. The speed of that, if we had that singular focus on the problems that affect New Zealand and the health sector today, maybe it's mental health. Imagine what we could do then. Imagine the society and the people that we, the happy environment that we would actually be in.
Yeah, I think the tricky thing in that is if we're focusing on cancer, that means maybe we're not focusing on mental health, or if we're focusing on cancer, we're not focusing on cardiovascular disease or diabetes. So you can start to see this is part of this is part of the problem of the health system is often torn apart by lots of differing priorities that affect people. So
and we're going to see the flow-on effect of not having the focus on all those services whilst we've been dealing with COVID as well, too, right?
Yeah, totally agree.
Absolutely.
And so, just a quick prod for more questions if anybody's got them in the audience. But we'll fire into another question here. It's a question that we could ask of any industry at this point in time, given the logistics scarcity of people. But Stephen, do you have a view on the potential long-term impact of COVID on pricing and on products? And are we seeing any international kind of contagion from a pricing perspective on premiums?
I think it's too early to say for New Zealand. New Zealand seems to be a slightly odd country, doesn't it? We don't seem to have had the experience playing out here with COVID that has happened in the rest of the world. So, that's interesting in itself. There certainly hasn't been any pressure on our rates or product at this point. The biggest impact we've seen, as I mentioned before, is probably the financial one on certain parts of the economy: travel, tourism, hospitality, those industries that have a high dependency on international supply chain, which is significantly disrupted. And so these are where the issues are. There's delays for rehab, which I talked about before. Screening potentially has downstream impacts. We don't actually know at this stage what that means. I do know there was one article that was published by the Cancer Foundation, I think, several weeks ago now. It might have even been a couple of months, where they suggested through the last period of lockdown, there are 133 women who are walking around out there not knowing that they've got breast cancer that would have been picked up if that screening had been done, albeit we were in lockdown. So I think that sort of stuff still has to play out for us. We work very closely with our international reinsurers to keep an eye on what's happening in the rest of the world and how that plays out for us. Currently, we don't see any impact on price. Currently, we don't see any impact or change to product. I briefly referenced our AIA Vitality program before. For us, that becomes a core focus of helping that well-being piece. Talked about those modifiable diseases, the mental health burden, particularly through lockdown. It doesn't matter what industry you look at, there is someone reporting that there are increased pressures, that there is increased stress, that there is overload, that there is too much work, and in every industry across the board. So for us, that product development, if you like, is actually about using programs like Vitality to try and direct assistance and services and support into those sorts of areas. And I talked at the top of when we started about this, I talked about our ability to change, to morph, to adapt new technologies, all of that sort of thing. And I think Vitality sits with that really, really nicely, in that we are thinking more holistically about how we treat our clients and how we help them through that process. It's no longer a case of, right, you're now terminally ill, here's a payment and goodbye and good luck. It's actually that whole support mechanism from start to finish is growing and evolving. And I think, and my hope for the industry is actually that we take a much more involved and integrated partnership with our advisors and with our clients to make sure that we have value and are providing that level of the support right the way through that customer journey.
We're running short on time, and so I will now just close off. But before I do, I want to ask each of you one final bonus round question. And I'll start with my experience. So my experience, and the last thing change that I intend to sustain, and the thing that I realized through COVID and through our lockdowns, is I've spent more time with my kids. I've gone from being a Saturday and a Sunday dad to being a dad that's kind of Saturday and Sunday, but still there for pockets during the week. We have dinner more often, and that's something that even when we go back to whatever the new normal is, I'm gonna try and do, because I've realized how much I enjoy that and how much I take out of it, and it's given me a bit of perspective on that part of life. For each of you, what's one thing that you look back on now and you go, actually, I'm going to keep doing that thing that I've started to do, or I'm going to remember that thing that I've learned? And I'll start in the top corner of my screen, and I'll say Kat first off.
I was hoping you would. What am I going to do more of, or what's the one thing? Human connection. I've really realised the importance of human connection. And if there's one thing that I want to do more of, is actually just spend time with the people I really care about. So making purposeful change in that. I am a bit of a workaholic. Don't tell it my insurance company. And I would really like to pull back on that and actually just have some real purposeful time with my family, some holidays. I really can't wait to get on a plane and just really watch them blossom. I've got a child going to university. I've got another one who wants to be a New Zealand softball player. There's some pretty special things going on. I've got one started in the industry. So just spend time with them. That's my thing.
Kirsten, what about you?
It's interesting because we have to actually make sure that we've got a strong framework ourselves. And Kat started this conversation today talking about how we need to look after ourselves. And the one thing about I haven't got there yet, but I'm learning to put myself first so that I can work for my team, our people, our customers, my family. So I think we all have to consider what could we be doing more for ourselves that actually has a beautiful flow-on effect to everybody else.
Yeah. And Jon, what about you?
I think everyone's kind of related a key concept around whānau, and I think that's a really important thing. It's all very well us thinking about ourselves, but if we're thinking about ourselves in isolation, that's a problem. And the strength of our response to the COVID pandemic has signalled that whānau is important in New Zealand and communities are important in New Zealand. And so one thing I intend to do is continue to make those a priority, whānau and community. Yeah.
Cool. And finally, Stephen?
I think the connection piece is really important, and we all know that we've actually made time to socialise with friends on Zoom calls and the like. At a more mundane level, I think I've eaten better at home than perhaps going to the shop out the road and getting a sandwich for lunch. Probably just to add in a slightly negative piece, in my household, I seem to have become second line support for every IT problem, and I'm not sure I'm a big fan of that.
Oh, I'll give you a call. Thanks, Potts.
So just to recap on the conversation, folks, we've heard from Stephen on the very big picture of what's fundamentally changed when we look back to past events. We've heard from Jon around some of the real seismic changes that the ministry have gone through over the last 2 years, probably 20 years worth of change in 2 years. And then we've heard a lot from Kirsten and Kat on the kind of the real changes in the front line of the industry out there in advisor land, and in terms of how advisors are shifting their business models and adapting to both the technological opportunity that COVID presents, and also the demand that it places on them to change how they work with clients. And so with that, we can wrap up the session. And just to finalize, thank you very much for all of the great conversation, the great answers, and thank you very much finally to our sponsors for the support. Just a quick plug for the rest of the sessions throughout the day. You can have a quick break now and then jump back on again for the keynote at 9:30. And there's some great sessions later on in the day to tune into. So log on and enjoy. Thank you very much.